I think it was 1975 when I moved from a small local ad agency to a rather large multinational downtown. And it may have been a minute, perhaps an hour, certainly not less than a day, when I began to realize that things were wildly different in this place than in the place on the other side of town. Now, maybe a month or so went by, and I began to realize that what they had talked about in college, cultural anthropology, was going to bite on my experience of coming to work for this new firm. They gave me a manual and told me how to write in the company way. And of course, I took a certain amount of umbrage being a newly minted college graduate. I know how to write. What do you mean to tell me I have to learn how to write all over again? And they said, well, yes, you know how to write your way, but we need for you to learn how to write our way so we can do it together. And that way, we have something to sell that is unique. And this was the first time that corporate culture struck me as an asset that could be marketed and could add to the value of the stock. Now that's really where we begin this discussion today about cultural anthropology as it relates to corporations and what is the value to corporations of culture. Now, one other thing you need to be aware of, and that is that, like most people, I walked into the new corporation and I was rather sensitive to the new surroundings, and so I noticed they looked different, they felt different, people behaved differently, they dressed differently, they did business differently, and so I was very quickly trying to assimilate and learn how to fit. But nowhere did I find a manual about how things were done in this new organization, except for the writing. And so it took me the better part of a year to fully understand the culture in which I was living and breathing and conducting my business life every day. And as a result, I think a lot of that first year was wasted as I began to try and put my roots down in this new culture. So here with the idea of teaching managers how to be great stewards of corporate culture. The greatest asset your corporation has is the great unseen asset of corporate culture, and you can influence it for the better. So we'd like to invite you to come and participate in our culture seminar and see how you can build the value inherent in coming to work in your organization. Now, 3 areas in this introductory video today. First is, what is corporate culture? And the second would be, why is it important? What's it got that you want to manage and improve the value of? And finally, what is corporate culture made of? And in those 3 areas, we'll begin to lay a foundation that we'll build on when we get together in person. Now, first, what is culture? Well, let's say it's the sum total of the ways you conduct business, the way you interact inside the organization, the ways you deal with your client base, the way you deal with your employees, and the way you deal with the marketplace in general. So it's a very, very, very big pot that we're talking about. But let's say that you notice a culture by its fingerprints, because again, culture is unseen. Culture is invisible. Culture is intangible. And so you notice it not by being able to put your finger on it, but seeing what happens when it puts its fingerprint on something else. So sales technique might be a pretty clear indication of culture. Aesthetics in the new organization might be an indication of the culture. Whether there are flowers on desks or not might be an indication of the culture. The way people greet each other in the morning or not might be an issue. Style and dress, the way we coach one another, the way we address one another, how are titles used in this new organization. All of these are the fingerprints of culture. And we would say, to really define what culture is, it's simply the way you live while at work. Now, obviously there's a lot there. The scary part is that most managers make culture automatically with every decision, every order, and every interaction, because people look at the manager and say, okay, by their behavior I know what's all right and I know what's not. So the issue of why culture is important comes right down to the fact that culture tells you, in the form of your manager's orders or encouragement, whether it's okay to take risks, whether it's okay to speak, what to wear, how to behave, what to work on, what to think about, and how to think, or not. All of these are going to be addressed by culture. All of them will be addressed by management. And what we notice is that Managers, again, are not thinking about building culture when they make a snap decision. They're usually only thinking about making a snap decision. They don't realize that it's like pouring wet cement. And by tomorrow, it will have taken the form that they have put on it with their decision, and everybody else will be queuing off that decision. So that's why culture is so important, and why your snap decisions are more important than you might think them to be, because everybody else is going to be turning or not based on looking at your earlier decision. Now, what's culture made of? What are the component parts that you might want to begin to think about? We'd say that culture is built by laying cornerstones or explicit standards about how you expect things to work. We want things to work this way. We want to conduct ourselves that way. We want to communicate about things this way. And these are the standards we're going to use to separate us from those guys, or separate us from those guys. We're the good guys. We're the better guys. We're the special guys because we do things the way we do them. What things are we talking about? Well, communication might be the number one demonstrator of corporate culture. You're going to sound different in this organization than they do down the street and around the corner. Then you're probably going to sell different here than they do down the street and around the corner. Probably going to manage differently. Probably going to strategize and think about the future differently. And ultimately, all of those issues will be reflected in the aesthetics of the place, which will register when people walk in the door. Now, we'd say that those 5 things pretty much comprise the sum total of the basics of corporate culture that a good manager ought to be sensitive to. And as we get more deeply into this relationship, we'll go into each one of those and look very carefully at how you can lay your fingerprints on the culture of communication, the culture of sales, of management, of strategy, and of aesthetics. The point being that when you start looking carefully at communication, you can decide how your culture will be reflected in the way you communicate. Do you stand when you present in a meeting? Does everybody sit down, maintaining a stable foundation and making sure that nobody rises above the group? It's all up to you to decide how you want to operate. When you manage, is it an authoritarian style or is it a more egalitarian style? And does everybody on the management team share it? When you strategize, do you think about how to increase productivity by 10% next year? Or are you thinking about an ideal scene of where you'd like the organization to go long term and then work backwards to figure out how to get there? Every one of these decisions is a cultural decision, and they're all at your discretion. So let's take a moment and summarize. First, there's what is culture. And essentially, it's the way you live while at work. The next question is, why is it important? Well, because it is the unseen steering wheel that points the organization in a particular direction, even in the absence of a particular manager. It's the omnipresent, ever-present determiner of course. A lot of people say that culture is the compass of the organization. Now, what's it made of? Well, we'd say that there are basically those 5 cornerstones, and the job of management is to lay those cornerstones in place and then step back and see how it works, changing the cornerstone every so often as necessary to maintain the cultural flow. Most people would rather go down the hall and work on a sales pitch than talk about culture. Why? Because it's unseen. It's intangible. And trying to build or manage or evolve the unseen is a job for a visionary. We think that your vision is going to determine how the organization works over the next 10 years, and we'd love to help you refine it.